Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Wednesday night worship. We are in the middle of a visual podcast series where we are exploring the story of First Lutheran Church and what we want the story of First Lutheran Church to be in the future. So each week, either myself or Pastor Corey or Pastor Linnea get to sit down with a guest or a couple of guests and have a conversation based on a whole variety of topics. Those topics have come from First Lutheran's Council, they've come from members of the congregation, a whole variety of sources. And today we are honored and blessed to have two folks with us this evening. And the topic of our conversation tonight is Ecology Champions. So as we think about the story of First Lutheran Church in the future, we feel like an important part of that story as a community has to do with our response to the ecology crisis, the environmental crisis that not only our country but our planet is facing right now, and exploring how we as a faith community can care for creation and respond to God's call within that. So I have a couple of guests tonight, and I will let them introduce themselves, but I want to say first that both of these folks who are sitting with me this evening are people that I have met through the gift of the Lutheran campus ministry community. So they are both connected in that way to us here at First Lutheran Church and to Bemidji State University and some of our work and our ministry over there. So I'll just give them a moment to introduce themselves, and Andrew, we'll start with you.
Yeah, hello, my name is Andrew Miller. I am currently a Green Corps member serving at the Office of Sustainability at Bemidji State. And I also am a resident peer minister at Lutheran Campus Ministry. So I've had a great time getting to know the people of the Bemidji community since I moved here in October, and as well have had a great time getting to know this environment, what the nature's like around here, and what sort of environmental issues the folks around here care about.
Yep, awesome.
Good evening. My name is Jordan Lutz. I have been a Bemidji resident for a little over 3 years now, and I serve in the role of Sustainability Project Manager in the Office of Earth Caretaking, Ganawenda Kamiga Wigamig, in Ojibwe. So on campus at Bemidji State, working with a great group of students that is always shifting from year to year, but working with them on various projects and initiatives. And as Pastor Emily mentioned, I too once served as a resident peer minister at the Lutheran Campus Center just down the road. So have a lot of very fond memories of spending time in that space. I'm really excited to have Andrew on our office team, as well as experiencing the campus center. And I'm really excited for conversation.
Awesome, me too. So we're going to begin this evening just by reading a piece of scripture. So I've got this Bible right here, and normally in our worship services we read scripture from a version of the Bible called the NRSV, which stands for New Revised Standard Version. And sometimes I like to read from different translations. Maybe it just gives us a different perspective, a few different word choices. And so today I'm going to be reading from something called the Common English Bible. And so I'm just going to read a brief passage from the book of Acts. This is from Acts 2, verses 42 through 47. And this is titled The Community of Believers. And let me say first that in the book of Acts, right before we get to the section that I'm about to read, a couple of things have happened. One of those things is that it was the day of Pentecost. So the Holy Spirit came down and it alighted on all of the followers of Jesus, and it was a miracle. They could understand each other, and they were given this gift of proclaiming the gospel and the good news of God in Christ. And then Peter, who is with the apostles, says this bold proclamation out loud to people who are listening. And I just want to read part of this because I think that it fits sort of the story of where we're going as a church community, or what we might have the capacity to do given given the need for sustainability in the world and the need for, I think, the church to respond to that in a prophetic way. So Peter says this from the prophet Joel. God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your children will prophesy, your young will see visions, your elders will dream dreams. Even upon my servants, the people of God, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. So right after that happens, we get to the community of believers. From the 42nd verse, the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the community, to their shared meal, and to their prayers. A sense of awe came over everyone. God performed many wonders and signs through the apostles. All the believers were united and shared everything. They would sell pieces of property and possessions and distribute the proceeds to everyone who needed them. Every day they met together in the temple and ate in their homes. They shared food with gladness and simplicity. They praised God and demonstrated God's goodness to everyone. The Lord added daily to the community those who were being saved. So you might be wondering why I chose this verse instead of what we would normally think of as the creation story, sustainability verse from the book of Genesis, chapter 1. That's usually what we all go to right off the bat. And I thought that's a great conversation to have. I know that's a conversation we'll have here at First Lutheran. I'm sure at Lutheran Campus Ministry in the future, Bible studies and other things around that particular topic, and especially that tricky word of dominion that pops up in the first creation story, which we can also talk about. But the reason I wanted to pick this story was because I think it gives us a new angle and a new lens, an important lens to think about sustainability, and that is from the concept of community. And so I wonder if for us as a faith community, as a Lutheran church here in Bemidji, as a Lutheran church on the whole, as the Christian sort of church, universal, if the way that we might be able to respond to the environmental crisis we face, to prophesy, to speak the truth to a world that needs to hear it, might be through the lens of relationship and community and connection. And this verse from the book of Acts just exemplifies the way that people care for each other in such an intimate way, and the way that they share meals together, and the way that they just share life with each other. To me, that just really feels like a return to roots, to the beginning, and to what's important. And I suspect that for us, the way that we might be able to best respond to the environmental crisis is by returning to each other in a way, and maybe to the creation and the God that created us. So I wanted to lift up that verse for us as just a starting point as we think about what it means to be people who believe in already enoughness and abundance. But I'd like to start just by asking y'all, since you are experts in sustainability, which is an amazing gift, if you could just share what sustainability means to you, and then maybe a little bit about what it's meant like in your life personally, or perhaps in your work at BSU, in the sustainability office, and just what that has felt and looked like for you. And how long, I guess, you've been sort of interested and curious and sparked by sustainability.
You want to take it away? Yeah, sustainability. So what comes to mind immediately for me is living gently. So living in a way in community that allows your presence to not hinder the ability of others to live in a similar fashion. I think I've had that internalized for a good while, but started really experiencing how it guided my actions shortly after my undergraduate experience. I was working for a company that would send me across the country for 2 weeks at a time to work on various projects. And a bit of an environmental framework to it. We were remediating brownfields, so looking for subsurface contaminants. So I felt like it was good work, but it was really hard to live out of a suitcase and in a hotel. particularly because meals were so often laden with so much waste, packaging waste. And it was that sense of filling up a rental car with all of these wrappers and unnecessary bits and pieces of how we so often do commerce and business. And then it was also that difficulty of being out of community or in and out of community so often that really spurred my transition to looking for something that would perhaps suit me, fit me better, and was able to find this current posting. But thinking about how I can live gently in a way that, again, is not creating waste, in a way that will eventually add up and cause issues. I'm going to have more to say about that, but I want to hear what Andrew's thinking about.
So my thoughts are along those same lines. What came to mind for me was mindfulness and the ability of us to focus on what each of our actions actually does and how they impact those around us. And I think sustainability is the extension of mindfulness to what is around us, our environment. And I think, and this will dive a little bit into the religious aspect of it, but when you think about how Christ lived his life, he lived it very mindfully in a way that everything he did had such purpose, and he worked effortlessly to make sure that he caused no harm, right? And I think that also extends to the environment. So when we say we want to live a life like Christ, that also means that we should be living a life that protects and supports the place that we live, Earth. In regards to my personal life, and I think, well, we're talking about Christ. He's a great role model, but very high expectations, right? And I think in my own life, it's been a work in progress. I started coming around to sustainability in high school and still felt, as I was moving through high school and into college, well, these issues feel daunting, but we're going to fix them. Someone will take care of them. I put that off my plate. But I think as I've continued into college and now into my first postgraduate opportunity, I see that that plate is becoming my plate again, and that the responsibility for creating a sustainable future for our grandchildren, really our children, is something that I feel deeply responsible for. And as a result of that, I'm finding that I need to change a lot of my ways, and I'm doing so bit by bit. So we can't flip overnight, but continuing to work and figure out how I can be more mindful of how my actions impact the environment around us.
That is I just can relate so much to what you're saying. And even as a person, I know you're in your 20s and 30s, as we are thinking about what the future looks like, I feel like we're sort of finding ourselves, feeling like we're holding the plate. Like you said, this is something that can't just be passed off to the next folks. This is something that I have a part in. And it sounds like both of you, especially you, Andrew, have related that back to your Christian faith in a really intimate way. And that, is the experience for me too. I would say that my interest in sustainability is totally connected to my identity as a Christian and in following Christ. But what I hear in both of you that is just so profound, and also I would say aligns, I knew you guys were the right people to have this conversation with, because also aligns with my perspective and experience, is that sustainability is is action. It's small actions that add up, right? But that more than that, it is this sort of orientation of your life in a direction that acknowledges that it's not just you and it's not just individuality, but it's that you as part of a whole, a much bigger whole, which is community, human community, but also creation community, just bigger and bigger. And so we're not just in these little silos that, you know, where we can do things that don't impact other people, but the choices that I make, right? And all the wrappers that I have, truly, all the things that I throw away, for example, those end up somewhere. They have an impact on someone or something, some part of creation in some way. So it's like this reorientation of your whole life bit by bit in this direction of saying, I am a part of that which God has created. And relationship and connection and community matter in all of that. So really grateful for the perspective you guys have offered. I wonder if, Andrew, you shared a little bit. Jordan, is there a way that that your Christian faith sort of connects with your identity as a sustainability advocate, as a person who cares deeply about creation and compassion? And
I think back to years at camp. Was a camper at through the Pathways program, and ended up counseling through Voyagers Lutheran Ministries, so shores of Lake Vermilion, thinking about how, particularly in those natural spaces, we want to be thinking about our lives and the lives of those we're spending that time with has an impact. Yeah, it's really tricky. I get bogged down and often thinking about the hierarchies when you start thinking of creation stories, and sometimes how faith can work its way into our understanding of our place on this planet. But have, particularly recently, been really inspired by some teachings of our neighbors, so Anishinaabe creation, and really reorienting my understanding of my relationship to our non-human brothers and sisters, as well as non-living resources, and recognizing the call to steward everything that entails. And I'm restructuring now, particularly, how I approach that and understand it and frame it for myself, but also for my 4.5-month-old son, so firstborn, thinking about how we want to bring him to an understanding of this world. So.
And it's true that, I mean, Christianity itself, the tradition that I claim, and have in fact inherited, has a long history with creation and with people who are not Christians, of real trauma and genocide and just incredible misuse of resources. And I think that it's incredibly important for us, for First Lutheran Church, for people who claim the Christian faith as their own, to take stock of that history, that it's not something that can be ignored or shoved aside or sort of washed over lightly, because that history is very real, and we see the effects of that ongoing history, I mean, all around us. You can see that in northern Minnesota. You can see it in the waterways and the lakes and streams, in the ways that our creation has been used in by humanity in ways that support us alone and give us as humans more sort of, like you said, hierarchy or lift or access and reach in life, and has devalued creation, absolutely. And in fact, the way that we as Christians have treated Indigenous people and have disrespected Indigenous practices and Indigenous spirituality. The same story there. Have again ranked ourselves in a hierarchy that is, I believe, the antithesis of what God calls us into in care of relationship and neighbor and respect. So I think that's a really important thing to lift up, that there is so much of value in traditions outside of Christianity, and that we in fact have a lot to learn from our neighbors and our siblings all around the world about how to treat each other with respect and to treat creation with respect. Mm-hmm. So I'm really, really grateful that you brought that up. I'm thinking about the creation story, of course, and am feeling like we should do at some point a study on that together. As a church, that would be really incredible here at First Lutheran in a community called Grace, which is this new worshiping community that I am helping steward here in the Bemidji area, perhaps even at BSU in partnership with the Sustainability Office in some capacity. We could talk about the creation story and kind of dig into that and what that means, because I think historically it has been interpreted just so horrifically that it feels like it's left us without any space to like move around in or see ourselves reflected in, you know? So just thinking about that, and I don't know, maybe if I could for a moment just share a little bit about how my experience of my Christian faith has led me kind of into sustainability, and why that's an important part of my life. Because just like you both, it's been this long sort of process and steps, small steps that I've been taking to kind of reorient myself and think about that in new and different ways. And it is always through conversations like this one that I get new perspectives, and that is so helpful, because what are we if we don't have each other, you know, to learn from and grow? So, but just thinking about the creation story first, and how there is, it's so often interpreted as a hierarchical story. But what I want to just lift up, just one brief thing from that, which is that the first thing that happens in those creation stories is God revealing God's self in our world and in the natural and in the water and the wind and the creatures that are created. And I think that there is something very profound about us going back to the very beginning of our sacred texts, the first words off the page that God has given us as a direction in our lives and in the world, and that is God's revelation in the natural world. So I just want to like lift that up for you guys, and a reminder for myself too, that it is profoundly true in our Christian tradition that God is present in creation, and that God reveals God's self in creation. And then I think too about our ancestors in faith and the people who we encounter in the Hebrew Bible, which we commonly call the Old Testament, and how those people are people of the earth. They're people who farm and shepherd and orient their lives according to the seasons, and the offerings that they give to God are grain and meat, and they're very earthy, earth-based things. And I think that there is a lot for us to learn from the fact that our ancestors of faith are people of the earth in a really profound way. And it makes me think too of the book of Leviticus, and it talks about this concept of like the Sabbath year. And so in the book of Leviticus, which I'm not expecting you guys to like remember at all, I can't remember which chapter it is actually, but it talks about the Sabbath year, which is that so you're planting your fields, and then every seventh year you let your field lie fallow, and trust that the earth is going to give you enough to sustain yourself and your livestock and your family. And what that means for us, I just think, is that we have a history that is connected to the earth in some deep and profound ways. And we perhaps have some hope in remembering that in a really good way. I made a couple notes here so I could kind of follow my thoughts. my gosh, I have so many things. But if I'm thinking about, I just want to say a couple things too about Lutheran theology. Since we're in a Lutheran church and we're a Lutheran faith community and y'all are connected to Lutheran campus ministry, but our Lutheran heritage gives us a couple of really helpful pieces of framework. One, I think, though it seems a little bit contrary, perhaps at first, is Jesus' death on the cross and resurrection. And what I mean by that is that as Lutherans, we would say, in Jesus' death on the cross, God revealed God's promise to us fully, which is that God will be with us in our moments of deepest suffering and agony, that God's not going to abandon us or leave us out somewhere in the cold. God will show up for us. It doesn't always look like what we want, perhaps. Doesn't mean that there's not going to be really difficult things that go along with that, but we won't be left alone. And I think that gives us some space, that idea gives us some space to say, if God is present with us, if God has promised that, surely God also is present in the groans and agony of creation and for creation too. We are not, we are part of the created order. So God has not abandoned creation as God has not abandoned us. And then I think of our Eucharist, our communion, and Andrew, I know you come from a Catholic tradition, and that we actually as Lutherans understand the Eucharist communion in a really, really similar way, which is that we have bread and wine elements from the earth, wheat and grapes, and those are fully elements of the earth, just as in communion they are also fully the presence of Christ with us. And so there's this phrase, this Latin phrase, which I may butcher, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. In Latin, finitum capax infiniti, which means the finite is capable of bearing the infinite. The finite is capable of bearing the infinite. It's a statement on how bread and wine, wheat and grapes, this finite thing is capable, we believe is capable of bearing the infinite nature of Christ. But what if we expand that and we think about creation also? I mean, that's what that means, yes? The finite things, creation around us is capable of bearing the imprint and the image of Christ just as we are. So I just wanted to share that for us as a Lutheran faith community, as we're starting to think about, I know I've been expounding for a while now, but as we're starting to think about the ways that we might connect our faith, what we do here on Sunday mornings, the way that we practice and worship and relate to God, what we've been taught to do inside this building, inside of our churches, how we might connect that to what is outside of us and the creation that exists all around us. So I have kind of a fun question. Maybe this has some space in it for you guys to just dream big with me. And as we're creating a community called Grace, right, this worshiping community in Bemidji, there's lots of room for dreaming and being creative also. So I will take notes on what you have to say here. But if you could imagine a church that held the concept of sustainability as one of its core values, as a commitment that it has in its path to discipleship, what might that look like? Anything goes. If you could imagine a church that said, we believe the way that we follow Christ, one of the most important ways that we're committed to is the path of sustainability, what would that look like?
Well, I think first I'll tie back to something you said earlier, which is that our role in doing sustainable action is to do little things, and little by little, as we continue to do these actions, we begin to make that impact. And that's for us as individuals. And I think a church represents a community of individuals with a collective mindset. And as a church, with so many individuals who share a lot of the same beliefs, then my expectation or my belief of what a sustainable faith group would look like would be one that puts forward a lot of effort into performing more and greater actions. Because individually, right, we can do good things, but the sum of our parts is greater than or right. What's the phrase? You know the one. But anyway, so I think that as a church group, we can do really big things that just a couple people here and there can't.
Yeah.
And I would like to see churches do that more in the same way that church groups advocate for a lot of various social issues, right? And I think it can be easily done with the collective action of church members. So I think we're just waiting to see when we step up for this particular issue. That's how I feel on it, at least, because most of the churches I've been a part of don't have as much of an eye towards sustainability as they do a lot of other issues, which are also important, right? So, but that's kind of my view on how a church could radically advocate for this issue.
So I'm hearing tangible service to the greater good, or acts of that tangible service. Very much agree. Feel like a lot of folks in our age group seem to move away from the church for a period of time. And I know that part of it for me was a desire to be in action, or to be living out the call to faith in ways I perceived as more tangible. I think that informs a little bit of how I would like to see this community take shape. So, dirty hands, doing a bit of co-gardening, getting out and perhaps worshiping outside under the stars or the sun. Worshiping in active ways would be really interesting to see. I think a unique piece to Bemidji State University's model for wellness, or model for sustainability, includes a wellness component. So thinking about our own individual ability to sustain ourselves, a lot of it comes down to individual well-being, which encompasses the physical, the nutrition, the emotional, the mental. And yeah.
I think also that a lot of our justice issues, a lot of people talk about how justice issues are intersectional. They all tie into one another. And so from a church perspective, where we talk a lot about doing to our brothers and sisters what we would want done for us, loving each other in that way, by focusing on sustainable action, we can help with the care for our brothers and sisters. There's a lot of evidence that climate change will drastically impact how we live our lives, and will do so a lot for those in lower income groups, also for those in our BIPOC communities. And so by working to try and prevent the impacts of climate change as much as possible, we can do really good things for our brothers and sisters.
It's like, I think what you were saying earlier too, Andrew, talking about how we're like all part of the body of Christ, and you need to have all of the pieces together to make up the whole. I'm thinking even of yesterday, Tuesday, and how the air in Bemidji was just thick with smoke from the Canadian wildfires, the fires in Ontario, and how I, like most of us, woke up and I thought that it was just fog, and I walked outside and all of a sudden, like, I took a breath in and it was like the air smelled warm. It smelled like a campfire. And I had this like moment where I was kind of freaked out and thought to myself, this is it. We're not experiencing the effects of climate change in like 20 years or 30 years. Like, this is happening now. Wildfire season is starting earlier and earlier. I don't recall ever being concerned about it when I was growing up here in the Northwoods. There was always enough green, enough conifers around. It wasn't an issue. There's so many lakes and streams, and now all of a sudden I'm finding myself thinking about fire. as a climate change issue in my day-to-day life. And so I think, and you're just so right, Andrew, that the people who will continue to be impacted the most deeply and the most dramatically by the changes in our environment are people who most often are on the margins of our churches and of our white Western society. And if we believe, which I do trust that we do as people of faith, if we believe and if we act like we believe that loving our neighbor and working to preserve our neighbors is integral to our faith, then there's hope. Then there's hope. Martin Luther has this quote. Speaking of hope, he has this quote that I think of often, which is that someone asked him if the world was going to end tomorrow, what he would do today, and he said that he would plant a tree. And I wonder if maybe that is the work of the church, maybe in a literal way, maybe also in, literal as in planting trees, also literal as in caring for our neighbors and making sustainable choices, advocating for policy, but in a hopeful way too, in the way that we think about our relationships and our community. My vision for a church that felt like its call to discipleship centered sustainability sounds a lot like yours, and it has a lot to do with that concept that you both mentioned of like embodiment, doing the things that we say we want to do, doing the things that we believe, and then worshiping in that way also. I love what you said, Jordan, about like worshiping outside. How would that change the way that we sing the liturgy together? How would that change the creation story if we read that together standing by Lake Bemidji as a faith community instead of in this building right here? Maybe it would open things up for us in a really different way. So I just really feel that hands-on embodiment. So just a couple more things to talk about. We've been talking for a while, and this is an awesome conversation. We could do this probably all night, I suspect. So as First Lutheran, as a faith community here, I'm wondering if you guys have any suggestions for ways that we can tangibly start that journey, the journey towards being a community that centers sustainability. Because this is part of our vision as a faith community for the future and how we want First Lutheran's story to be told. We want to be known as a community that cares for creation in really profound ways. And we have made some really small steps. They seem small, but they're actually incredible steps. Like, for example, Sunday morning worship, we use this really cool drop-down screen that's right over there. So we've limited the amount of paper that we use bulletin-wise. At our coffee hour, we use ceramic mugs, so that is a really cool thing. So we are making some steps like that, and those are tangible, important things. But just wondering if you all, especially in what you've been doing at BSU and the steps you've taken there, have any suggestions for us as a community to make some steps forward?
I love those examples you've already shared.
Oh, yes.
When I think of where to start, I always think of at the kitchen table or in the kitchen itself, in the fellowship hall. I think of the way in which we interact with food, our daily sustenance, as being so critically important and informative to how we can integrate sustainability and do so. And I think, yes, so trying to reduce waste in the serviceware we're using, but also thinking about the value inherent in what we are consuming. You've mentioned Eucharist and how it's, so the finite is able to bear the infinite. We have finite resources. So to think about, on an individual level, wasting food or not consuming all that we have so lovingly produced and crafted is just, it's heartbreaking. So I think a lot of that starts, again, at table, but also the opportunity to then share in story and just commune anecdotally, because that's where a lot of this stuff starts. ideation, sharing of what has worked for some and what hasn't worked for others, and simply spending that time in community to experience the fellowship.
Have you found that your sustainability practices in your own life have been strengthened by being able to talk about them with other people, or just to live maybe in campus ministry or wherever you've been with other people and do it together?
Yeah, and that's the thing. So I have this huge leg up upon most people because I am operating and working every day in a space where we have college students coming through with the best ideas ever. And so I'm the one who gets to hear all of them and then work through how we can operationalize them and how we can adopt them on an individual or on an institutional-wide basis. So, yeah, I fully understand and acknowledge that I cannot accept the entirety of what I share and do because it's come from others.
That's so cool. Yeah, community. Ugh, that's what it comes back to.
To hop off that, I think also with community, I told Jordan this earlier this year, but one of my New Year's resolutions was to live more like Jordan because of how sustainable he lives his life, and in every action, you can find that care for our environment. So, in terms of how to start as an individual or as a community, I think one of the best ways is to identify what are the things that you care about. And oftentimes, I think, especially on the environmental side, whether it's, oh, I like to hunt, I like to fish, oh, I like to see the songbirds that migrate through here, or, oh, I love seeing these nice sunsets on Lake Bemidji. Whether it's a creature, a plant, or just the actual visual of that place, take that as motivation to begin your sustainable action. And I think from there, once you've identified that thing, I know for me it's easy. I'm from La Crosse, Wisconsin, so I think of the bluffs there. And not wanting to lose that to climate change, and that really motivates me. I think once you identify that thing, you can look at a lot of the environmental talking points, things such as reducing single-use packaging, trying to bike more instead of driving, eating more greens instead of, and reducing our meat consumption. Looking at each of these issues that a lot of people talk about and find out how they will actually impact that thing that you hold as your motivation, right? So, and whether, with plastic production increasing emissions or by using less farmland for livestock, then we can start using it for more sustainable actions. How's that impact, my bluffs, or for some instances, boundary waters, things like that. I think also with mentioning the boundary waters, being someone who cares a lot about sustainability can get very discouraging because of how dire this issue is. And I've seen in sustainable camps there's two really main views on the environment is like, oh, we can do good here. It's really exciting. We're talking about renewable energy, or we're talking about electric cars, things like that. But it doesn't feel like urgent. It's just like, oh, these are cool, good things. And then there's the other side, which is we are working to save our lives, right? And I think that you can find the joy in a lot of these things, but for some folks it really is. There's a lot of anxiety about what will happen if we continue to live the way that we are.
I appreciate that you bring up anxiety, and that it is a reality of many individuals' lived experience of waking up to like yesterday, a very smoky, it hit many senses. So recognizing again how we can depend upon one another in community to work through some of those anxieties, and acknowledging that to be a sustainable community, it's not simply our actions in relation to resources, but it's one another. It's the support we provide. It's the uplifting word in passing that will help remind of some of that motivation to continue working for the good cause.
Yeah, and I think, and by bringing that up, I meant to go with that it can be discouraging, but there's still time for us to do this work, and there are things that we can start doing today in our own lives that can begin to make an impact. So I was trying to go with don't get discouraged, but I kind of went on the discouragement train.
But also though, Andrew, you were telling the truth about a thing. You're telling the truth about a situation. And in the Lutheran tradition, that is profoundly important to us. Call a thing what it is, right? And say the truth about how the world is around us. And, and then pray and listen for God's response, and then action, a step that comes next, because God doesn't just, it's not this sort of illusory hope that we have. God doesn't just leave us in a place. God calls us into the work of community and relationship and caring, actually deeply caring for the world around us, and doing that hard work, being hopeful about it, and hopeful about what the possibilities are that are ahead of us, but not just being oh, I have hope, like you said, oh, fun, electric cars, yes, but also just looking at the reality, calling the situation what it is truthfully, and then responding to that.
I think that when we look at great figures from the past, a lot of the figures that we think of are people who lived through very tough time periods and didn't let them get them down and worked to overcome that. And I immediately think of Martin Luther King Jr. and his work in the civil rights movement in what must have felt like an impossible situation. And he still fought for what he believed in. And I think that's something that we can still do as Christians when it comes to the environment.
Yeah, there's a sermon right there. So just as a final sort of query to wrap us up here, I'm wondering if either of you have resources that might just come to your head, sort of off the top of your head perhaps, that might be good places for those folks who are listening to this podcast and are I want to learn more, but I'm not sure where to start. Where might be a good place for us to begin that process?
So, few of my resources that I use, I look to youth environmental activists. A lot of the different states have chapters, and that's a great place for high school and college students to get involved with environmental activism. I also think MN 350, and Jordan, I'm sure you mentioned it also, but it's a Minnesota-based climate advocacy group. And so looking at the issues that directly impact our local communities, there's national and international groups, like Greenpeace, that are great to follow and see what kind of actions they are taking, or the School Strike for Climate. And then the final one I'd say is look at what local sustainability communities are doing. The city has a sustainability committee that meets once a month, and there's no requirement to be there, but it's open to anyone in the public.
I didn't know that. Bemidji has that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
And then also just finding, for example, Harmony there's a lot of folks there that care about sustainable action, and getting to know the people there in that community and what type of local environmental issues we can work to solve together, that's another great option for local work.
What a fantastic spectrum, Andrew. So another one for political advocacy would be our local chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby, working to bring about carbon fee and dividend policy at the federal level. I think your point about looking to some of the local business opportunities for learning and becoming, per se, a more sustainable customer or patron. Yep, Harmony is a great one. So going back to simply the fellowship and the conversation, I feel like it's kind of a cop-out in a sense, but I really want to encourage just opening up minds and perspectives to learning from, I don't want to point to any particular category, age group, what have you, because I think there's lessons to be learned from anyone and everyone. I think about my grandparents who lived their lives with the internalization of the Great Depression and how they came to conserve. I mean, I think about using a hanky as a reusable napkin in so many other ways. This allows me to reduce my waste on an individual daily basis. And that's something that I'm probably not going to learn from your youth member or something. Mm-hmm. So recognizing that it's not simply looking to youth, but looking to our elders and simply engaging in that conversation.
What I love about what both of you just said is that it points our church outwards. And that's part of the conversation that First Lutheran has been having, and that's one of the things that has just continually arisen for us in the time that we've spent as a community thinking about who it is that we want to be. It seems as though God is calling us as a community beyond these walls and out into connection with others. And I would say connection with the world around us also in new and different ways. And both of or all of the things that you both described orient us in that direction. I mean, it just affirms that for me, that there are resources in the young folks in our pews, there are resources in the elders in our pews, and the same goes with the community members that are all around us, including the incredible resources in our indigenous communities in this area. So thank you so much for offering that. I want to add just super briefly, two Lutheran resources. One is this really cool website community called Lutherans Restoring Creation that offers paths forward for congregations, like tangible next steps if you want to talk about creation care and how to do the things in your congregation. So that's an awesome resource. I would say just Google Lutherans Restoring Creation. Super interesting, little Bible study sermon ideas, also really cool stuff. And second is this organization that I just learned about called Blessed Tomorrow, Caring for Creation Today. And it is this ecumenical partnership for people of faith, and it includes not just Christians, but people who are Muslim and Hindu and Baha'i and every tradition that you can think of coming together to talk about what it means to be a person of faith and also a person who wants to take care of the creation around us. And so they're doing some really cool stuff from what I understand, for the Lutheran Church on the church-wide level, and then also I think advocacy-wise when we think about the government and wanting to make some big changes in policies and stuff. So also cool. But you guys, thank you so much for the conversation today. You are both such cool people and inspiring to me too, as somebody who wants to continue to learn about sustainability and how I can make good and healthy and holistic changes in my life. So if you would join me, I'd like to just close us in prayer. Creator God, we give you thanks for bringing us together on this day, on this evening, to have what has been a fruitful and just wonderful conversation. We pray that the things that we have engaged with today, the ideas, the complexities, some of the anxiety, but the hope that you offer us ultimately might spark something within us as a faith community, that we might make changes that will lead to health and restoration and wholeness, both for ourselves and for the wider community that surrounds us. Give you thanks for Andrew and Jordan for them joining us this evening and for the work that they do in the sustainability office. We lift up each and every one of us in this congregation and, in fact, all of creation, all that surrounds us, and all which we know you deeply, deeply love. We pray all of this in the name of your child, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.